Welcome back for this session. Today we are going to discuss about the second part of Osmoregulation, which is basically Osmoregulation lesson 2. I hope last time you have understood regulation of water potential of blood. So today now we are going to discuss how the solid concentration of blood is regulated. Now, if the sodium ion concentration in the blood is low, there is what is happening here. Then the blood water potential increases, becomes less negative, and water moves by osmosis into the tissues. This results in a slight lowering of blood pressure monitored by cells which are in contact with the afferent vessels going into the glomerulus. So, if that one happens, guess what is going to be taking place in our body? If the blood pressure is below the set point, that is normal. These cells stimulate the secretion of renin. Remember the cells they are talking here, the same cells, if you remember, osmoreceptor cells in the hypothalamus are the one to detect if blood pressure goes down the set point. So what these cells does, these cells are the ones which stimulate the secretion of renin, an enzyme that reacts with a blood protein to produce angiotensin. So when angiotensin reaches the adrenal cortex, it stimulates the secretion of aldosterone. So now you have heard that this is a kind of a sequence. Number one, you have heard if the blood pressure goes down or below the set point, the osmoreceptor cells stimulated the secretion of renin, which is basically the enzyme that reacts with a blood protein to produce angiotensin. So now, what happened to angiotensin? The angiotensin goes through the bloodstream until it reaches to its target organ, which is the adrenal cortex. Then it stimulates the secretion of aldosterone. Basically, this aldosterone, it's also another kind of hormone. So let us see what would happen when there is this production of aldosterone hormone. When angiotensin reaches adrenal cortex, it stimulates the secretion of aldosterone. Then aldosterone accelerates the active transport of sodium ions from the convoluted tube and collecting duct to the tissue fluid and blood. So you have heard the effect of aldosterone is to activate or to accelerate the active transport of sodium ions from distal convoluted tube and collecting duct to the tissue fluid and blood. So that one is clear. I hope so. Now, water always follows by osmosis. This is true because once the tissue fluid and blood both are highly concentrated with sodium ions, again, this would trigger the osmosis. And whenever you talk osmosis, you understand water basically. That's why they say water always follows by osmosis, and the blood pressure rises until it returns to the normal. It returns to the set point. Again, if the blood pressure is higher, that is the however side. If the blood pressure is higher than the set point, negative feedback reduces the secretion of aldosterone. So basically what happens is there's a kind of physiological mechanism which has to be there, which is basically the negative feedback mechanism that should reduce the secretion of aldosterone. Now you have heard how the solute concentration is regulated in bloodstream. So now we are moving to adaptations for osmoregulation. We are talking about osmoregulation, the balance of water and the solute concentration in our blood. But again, remember, we can't leave behind especially desert animals. How do they survive in such environmental conditions there? Okay, and again, these are the animals basically they also need their water content and salt concentration in their body tissues to be regulated. So that's why now we are going to go through all this list. Animals that live in desert area have the following adaptations. Number one, they have large number of nephrons to increase the surface area for the absorption of water. I hope you know the major function of nephron. Number one, basically, the greater the number of nephron, basically this one leads to increase the surface area for the absorption of water. Again, another second adaptation, these animals, in most cases, you could find they have small glomeruli to reduce the amount of filtration and urine production. So remember, these are desert animals, and remember, desert animals, they tend to produce highly concentrated urine so that they can conserve as much water as possible in their body tissues. Good example is camel and kangaroo rat. Remember those two desert animals, how they conserve their water in their body tissues. Just they use this adaptation of producing urine, which is highly concentrated. Third, they excrete uric acid and little urea to conserve water. That is what I have been explaining to you. In most cases, desert animals tend to produce highly concentrated urine in order to conserve as much water as possible in their body tissues. So it is an adaptation apparently which goes only to desert animals. And birds, by the way, you know birds, they also produce highly concentrated urine, much as birds, they are also regarded as terrestrial animals. Again, there is this adaptation, and you have to pay much attention on it. Most desert animals, they tend to reflect longer loop of Henry. Remember, the longer the loop of Henry, again, increases the surface area of water reabsorption. So that's why we have two categories of animals. Some, they live in desert areas, others, they live in semi-desert areas. So those which live in semi-desert areas, they have short loop or longer loop, they have a short loop of Henry, so which means there's no need of increasing their surface area of water reabsorption. But for desert animals, you have to pay much attention. They always have relatively longer loop of Henry to increase the surface area of water reabsorption. They store large quantities of fats in localized areas to produce metabolic water. The camel stores a lot of fats in its hump. I like this. Remember, in homeostasis, I remember when we have also discussed about this point, adaptations of camels to live in desert areas permanently. So camel, they tend to store fats in their hump for one reason. Just in case whenever the chemical breakdown of fats starts from their hump, the major reason for that is to produce metabolic water, which in turn camel and even kangaroo rat, those desert animals, they need. Again, most of desert animals, they have a tissue tolerant to avoid extreme dehydration. This is an adaptation to camel. So we are done with structural adaptations. I don't know whether if you analyze some are structural adaptations in line with nephron, but again, you have to go to the however sign. Then we also talk about the behavior mechanisms. Behavior methods such as starvation. Most desert animals, they tend to burrow themselves in the sand just to avoid too much dehydration. That one is also, but it is a behavioral adaptation. It is not a structural adaptation. Last, migration to look for water, looking for shade places during sunny day and hibernation. So all this basically they are regarded as adaptations for osmoregulation, especially for the case of animals that live in desert areas.